It's the Redbird Reboot podcast. Are you ready to get rebooted, Cardinals fans? He settles down, at least in the zone, and does not stop running.
Blake Murphy.
This is the identity for the Arizona Cardinals.
The run defense is just horrendous, and it's been horrendous for the Cardinals for a long time.
And Marcos Labrada.
He's going to bring over his philosophy. It should make it better.
Present the hottest NFL podcast from the country's hottest state.
He should be turning around the logo.
Actually, some breaking news we can cover here. This popped up just about, 6 minutes ago.
It's Redbird Reboot.
Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans. Welcome back. It's the Redbird Reboot. I'm here with Marcos Labrada, here to talk all about your Arizona Cardinals. And it's been a little while that we've been off, Marcos. Obviously, the Cardinals themselves have been off. It's that summertime where it's just baseball games. Teams are going to be on break for the most part. But we've got training camp coming up at the end of this month of July as well. A lot of Cardinals fans are excited. It's the first time that we're going to probably see a healthy Kyler, be able to see a new hopeful superstar in Marvin Harrison Jr. And the first time in a while, Cardinals fans can have hope that the team can get back to their competitive ways. We've been pretty busy ourselves, I think, for the most part, in between enjoying some of the break, but also just a lot going on. So before we begin, how are you doing, Marcos, at least as we're entering kind of just the lull before you hit training camp hard and then it does not stop until the Super Bowl?
Well, I'm definitely not enjoying the heat. That's for one. We obviously are going to remember that, like, when it comes to the heat, it's like if you live in Phoenix, it's just you know when it hits you. When it hits you, you get in your car and it's the worst thing possible. If you guys have shade, like you guys know, when you guys have shade, you're good to go. But when you're right in the sun, oh my God, it's just horrendous. But aside from that, we've been, keeping up with the Cardinals news and whatnot. We took our little break, but yeah, so far I'm doing good today.
Yeah, it's good to be able to get back. I know we had some areas back and forth where sometimes people were sick, sometimes people had other stuff that went back and forth. We were like, we want to still be able to make sure that we can get in a little bit of summer shows. We've got obviously another show or two with some nice guests coming in, which will be exciting for you guys, at least before training camp officially kicks off. But let's go and talk at least now with OTAs over, with everything else done. Did want to at least mention today that there was at least a unfortunate death in the NFL. The NFL rookie, I believe named Kyrie Jackson, fourth round draft pick of the Minnesota Vikings, unfortunately passed away. It's one of those areas where a car accident, there is assumed that there could be alcohol involved, is what the police report had said. We're going to have to see at least with how that turns out, but did want to at least just be able to open at least just with like a little bit of remembering, just because not only is it something that is, I think, important to not just focus on with NFL players, but just like in general, it's always a tragedy whenever you get someone who's like a young 23-year-old kid. He had some former teammates at least that were like that too. Marcos, I wanted to at least just also say how unfortunately this did remind me of some of Cardinals experienced some of this a couple of years ago as well. We did want to at least just be able to have our thoughts and prayers go out to Kyrie and rest of his family and other teammates as well. We've kind of seen a sweeping bit of mourning going across the NFL, across social media today as a result.
Yeah, it's just always a sad tragedy, and it's like we understand that, like, when you're young, you have to be able to get those young years out of the way. And when you become 21, obviously you decide, hey, we're gonna celebrate life, we're gonna go out, we're gonna party. We all for the most part did it, and we all for the most part knew the risks in getting behind the wheel, if that was the case. I'm not saying it was.
It seems like it was another driver is what they talked about, where it seemed like they were part of the victims of there. Obviously there's still areas going on, but the other car at least lost some control, struck them. It's just at least a reminder also, I think, too, of life is something that's definitely precious. And so like it's very different when you see people who are older who it feels like are there, and then there's other times you get people who are just young with, he had a huge career in front of him. So it's just one of those things that's sad, just a great reminder at least of like, hey, like be careful when you're driving, especially don't drive if you've had any drinking for the most part. It's one of those things that we just wanted to at least be able to mention on. So his thoughts and prayers with his family. And it did, Marcos, I think, strike back to thinking about a
Jeff.
couple of years ago with the Arizona Cardinals, and as you mentioned it there, Jeff Gladney, similar area with a car accident that he was in. Just he was about 25 years old or so, and that was something at the start of the 2022 NFL season that just was a gut punch for the Cardinals. They never seemed like they fully recovered from some of it as far as that season goes. I do want to at least be able to look at and say that this is kind of, it's not an easy way to like transition out of a serious topic for the most part, but I think when it comes to areas like sports, it can be a great escape from a lot of things that go on in life, whether there's like areas of problems. It can also be a great place of finding community. Like, there can be a person who's part of a rival team that you can kind of be able to talk with on a Sunday and have kind of some of that team camaraderie, even if people are maybe at a different level of background than you are or different areas. Like, there can be some unity you see within the teams. And thinking back, I think to a few years ago, that 2022 Cardinal season, it was just pretty much that everything seemed like it was going wrong. So, like, take this July 2022, go back into that. Cardinals had come off of a playoff appearance. They had a disastrous offseason. Kyler Murray essentially deleted everything on his Instagram account for the Cardinals. We had that contract clause with the film study clause that went on. You had I believe that there was, I believe that Hollywood Brown had a speeding ticket that happened for the most part as well. There was also just issues with injuries. Like, we got to see that Kyler not only got sick for that season, at least missed some of training camp. There was plenty of other injuries with Rodney Hudson. Justin Pugh wasn't ready to start the season. DeAndre Hopkins was suspended for 6 games. Like, it's kind of one of those things that we forget about. Cardinals did that trade for Hollywood Brown, and they also had all sorts of just like questions, at least with other people were questioning Kyler Murray's character for the most part, focus and work ethic. Sean Kugler, and when we get into the season, this is even like we haven't even gotten into the season yet for all of this stuff. We also had issues during the season with Sean Kugler fired, Steve Keim fired. There was a whole bunch of problems, at least for the most part, with the team. That was where we were a couple years ago. People were looking at the Cardinals as like that next team that seemed like they were kind of like on a knife's edge, or like it was like you felt like that one threads holding together a rope that was about to snap, and it really did that season. You got to see that like in real time on Hard Knocks for the rest of the Cardinals, the non-Cardinals fan base, I should say, who like the NFL. Fast forward now 2 years later, Marcos, and there's been a revitalizing that seems to have happened with the team. They're still not, I think, back into where they've been looking at contention wise, but we'll talk a little bit today about what people are expecting from this Cardinals team. And it does really feel like that optimism has returned in the desert, and that has been pretty evident through a lot of what the offseason coverage has been of this team, of how their draft went, of their picks, and a lot of more confidence in the organization overall.
Yeah, it's been on the up and up. That's for sure. It just when we went from negative and negative over and over and over again. Now we're going into like we're getting positive news about the team, and we're getting it like consistently. It's not going to be no longer like, hey, like this thing. And by the way, I'm just going to go ahead and admit the off season, I don't really pay too much attention to it, but the negatives always stand out. And because the negatives always stand out every single off season, it was just like demoralizing. It just made me not want to follow the offseason stuff at all. Because I was like, well, why am I going to follow it for if it's just going to be another negative going into our team? But this year has been nothing but positives. There's been positive feedback from the coaches. The national media has taken to being more positive for this team, looking at it from a good perspective and not from like a, hey, like this just the Cardinals being the Cardinals and whatnot. So everybody has a good feeling, especially, the local and national media about this team at least improving and going to the right direction.
No, absolutely. I think it's important to be able to note that a lot of that starts and ends with the Cardinals quarterback, Kyler Murray. A lot has been made about where Kyler ranks as far as in not just the pantheon of quarterbacks, but it's one of those situations where we see it happen all the time. There's a quarterback who gets drafted number one overall to a team that usually did not do well the year before, is usually in some form of turmoil. And what we usually can see is that the rookie quarterback contract and some of that quarterback's skills and ability help determine kind of the direction that the franchise goes for the most part. But we've also seen, Marcos, that when it comes to a team like the Cardinals, this is a team in where they've been, at least for a long time, more of a bottom feeder throughout the NFL. They've been at the bottom ranked as far as with win totals, haven't had a Super Bowl for, I mean, since the Super Bowl era started, haven't had a kind of long stretch of winning games for the most part. And a lot of it too was they really did not have quarterback that they themselves drafted who was kind of that franchise cornerstone piece. They've had receivers aplenty. There was a small stretch maybe in the 70s where, you and I weren't even a twinkle, in our parents' eyes. It was just like we just did not exist for the most part. You have to have people like Walter Mitchell and others who are around to like remember that era to be able to help. What it really comes down to is that a lot of Cardinals fans have felt like that so far with what Kyler Murray was expected to be of the light of this franchise and then what Kyler Murray has actually been. It's been a lot more of a case of where there have been times where we've seen him be able to pop up, and there's other times we just haven't seen him be able to take that leap from super into superstardom, essentially. It begs the question, at least, is he a star quarterback or not? This is the first year, I think, Marcos, and where a lot of people have felt like that this is going to be a chance for Kyler to define and have some of that sustainable success. And what's interesting is this has been brought up from other people as well. So, going through an article from, I believe it was Judy Batista of NFL Network, went over her 2024 NFL MVP dark horses. Now, we can talk about like the reality of some of this, which it seems like it's a quarterback award each year. Like we've seen go from Patrick Mahomes to Lamar Jackson. This is looking at who would be guys who we wouldn't think would be at the top of the MVP list. So it's like Mahomes isn't going to be on here. Lamar's not going to be on here. Even maybe a quarterback like Joe Burrow, if he bounces back, is not going to be on here. What we do have is we've got Jared Goff. We have Tyreek Hill, a receiver, a running back, and Christian McCaffrey. And Kyler Murray making the list for the most part. So he's honestly had one of the best off seasons of his career from everything he's talked about. There's this new energy, this new positivity that's going on that we really have not seen probably since the 2021 season with Kyler. We did at least get to see that in the final 4 games of the season. He hit about 70% of his passes for 935 yards. And we can talk a little bit about like what some of these projections mean for the most part, but overall, the Cardinals were very good with running the ball. They led the league in total offense, and now you've got Marvin added to the mix. They'll have to win a lot more games for Murray to catch voters' eyes, and that's something I think that we saw earlier when the Cardinals were 7-0. Kyler was playing great. We saw that the team was having him in the MVP mix. When the team started losing games, when Kyler missed some time, and then we saw that late season slide, it was done essentially. So, question at least here is this something that Cardinals fans should we be expecting something like this? Is this too high of an expectation? What are some of your thoughts here about Kyler being mentioned as like a possible MVP dark horse?
Well, like I mentioned earlier, that's what you want your quarterback to be in like talks and contention for, because that means that from what the national media is looking at, they're looking at positive change. They're looking at like him getting better, him moving forward, him getting to the point where like you are the franchise quarterback. So you have to not only take those steps towards it, but work hard during the offseason to be able to like get people to like start noticing that like you're taking this serious and you're moving forward and you're trying to like step from like last year and take a step up on that ladder to where you need to be able to move up further and further up to hopefully becoming not only league MVP but also leading this team to a playoff, like either a playoff berth or a playoff win or possibly even further than that. So as long as people are watching you take those steps forward and then they see the raw stats and they think to themselves, okay, well, this was a positive move. He's looking good. So he is definitely a dark horse, and that is good to be mentioned as a dark horse because we all know the MVP goes to one player every single year. But if you're mentioned in that category, that means that you're being noticed. So that's good. And I'm proud to hear that like he's at least being mentioned by the national media as a dark horse like candidate.
No, it's great. One of the things I think, at least, that, and this is maybe the question that I think we can look for the most part, is what would it take for Kyler Murray then to actually end up being in the MVP type of category? And that's something that I think it's hard to be able to know for sure because you have to be able to then say, well, we're going to compare the quarterback to basically himself in order to look at and say that this is what we're going to go through. But there are some things that we can look at as far as what it will take for Kyler to succeed. And so here I wanted to go over a little bit, at least, of just looking at some of Kyler. We'll look at the passing stats because I think with rushing, what we can say is there was the 2020 year where he had 800 yards or so. We've seen usually younger quarterbacks can run the ball more. We've seen at least that there's a boost you get from the system, but essentially it comes down to it's a passing award, it's a quarterback award. So when we look at Kyler and his first year, there's a couple of things I think that you want to look through, which what I like to do is I like to look at specifically, there's a touchdown percentage that you're going to have, which in some cases at least you can see, and then there's a interception percentage you'll have. Sacks are something that is interesting. Usually you look at sacks as a function of how the quarterback plays themselves, because sometimes sacks are on the quarterback. Other times it can end up being a feature of just with where the team is. And then looking at yards per attempt. So like yards per attempt is you throw the ball, how many yards every time you throw the ball are you going? Now, when you're talking about yards per attempt, and we can show some of this here, what really it comes down to is, was your offense effective? Because the idea is if your offensive line is good, if your receivers are being able to run, the quarterback seeing and able to stand in the pocket and throw the ball deep, and that comes from having a strong, balanced rushing attack where you're able to say, hey, if you're just dropping back all the time and just throwing the ball deep, eventually teams are going to key in. You're not going to have as much time. They'll be blitzing you more. You're going to have coverages drop back to take away that deep ball. So if your offense is really thriving, that is where your yards per attempt will come in. So last year we got to see the top offense overall within the Niners were up high, the Tua Tagovailoa with Tyreek and Jalen Waddle, CJ Stroud in his rookie year, and of course the MVP and Lamar Jackson. All of these guys had some, maybe not career best, but really high yards per attempt. When you look at the league average overall, you're probably talking about somewhere between about like 7 or so, and then with other quarterbacks, it's probably going to be a little bit in the 6s for the most part. What we've seen with Kyler Murray has been a really kind of interesting trend as far as it comes to with those yards per attempt. So let me rewind a little bit back here to some of the previous seasons, Marcos, because this is kind of cool when you look at and kind of want to build some of that narrative with Kyler. So when looking at his rookie year, Kyler was probably in the lower portion. Obviously that was a fine, solid rookie year. He wasn't quite up there. We wanted to see growth. We wanted to see improvement for Kyler Murray. In 2020, his net yards per attempt went up from 6.9 up to 7.1. He made the top 15. So now he's above average. He's up there with the likes of a Matthew Stafford, with a Ben Roethlisberger. So this is where you get to see, hey, they added DeAndre Hopkins. His number of yards went up. His also number of yards per game went up. So he started at about 232 yards per game as a rookie. Usually with NFL, you say a star is usually that 300-yard passing game, 3 touchdown. Like that's a star performance. You don't see those every week. Like those are more rare. But Kyler went up, so you got to see passing about 250 yards per game. You can kind of see you see the growth. And then the big year, 2021, when Kyler was in MVP consideration. You take a look at these lists for the guys who are over there, at least with the 2021 season. And when it came to overall yards per game, yards per attempt here, you got to see Kyler's in the top 5. So you're like, okay, well, he's in the top 5. Who are kind of the guys you're comparing to? We got Joe Burrow, who went to the Super Bowl that year. You've got the Niners offense, who's always pretty high. That's always just great offense. You got Matthew Stafford, who won the Super Bowl that year. You've got Kyler. That was when he was in MVP consideration that year. And of course, Aaron Rodgers, top 7, did win the MVP that last year. So what does this all mean, Marcos? This is a lot of areas, a lot of stats for the most part. You can also kind of see the narrative of what happened in that next season, as we were just talking about. We all know Kyler and his stats and output fell. He also tore his ACL. He fell to the bottom of the list for the most part as far as it went, with bottom 25 in terms of yards per attempt. In fact, I believe, statistically speaking, he was 33rd in the league. So you're talking about he wasn't even in the first list of quarterbacks. He was lower than all these other quarterbacks for the most part. That was the year where everything was just a train wreck. It kind of was almost a return to that rookie season as far as it, but a step below. There was no Hopkins. Hollywood Brown was your ex-receiver. So that begs the question, what did the Cardinals do last year? What's interesting, I think at least, is you take a look at 2023. And when you average across his 8 games, especially look at the last 4 games of the year, it looks very similar to Kyler's rookie season. He's 24th. That for rookie season, he's 25th, about 6.7 as far as yards per attempt, as far as touchdowns, interceptions. All this to say, Marcos, is you'll know if Kyler Murray is in that MVP conversation if he makes it into the top 10 or top 5 with that yards per attempt. We see the team is winning games, touchdowns, interceptions. But that's probably the best measure to know, at least, if is he going to be a dark horse MVP or not. I think it's hard to say that he's just going to immediately go up there. Maybe this is just an off season that we get to see that happen for the most part. Like we have seen him make that leap before. But I think for a lot of Cardinals fans, if we can get back into like maybe the top 10, top 12, and just be able to kind of return to form, I think that would mean the Cardinals are going to see an offensive production kind of return to where we were looking at when the Cardinals were winning, 9, 10, even in 2021, 11 games per season.
I'm looking at the list. I see him wedged between Gardner Minshew and AOC. The other AOC, not the politician. So yeah, like obviously there's a big correlation between yards per attempt and where he's at the MVP, like race or talks and whatnot. So one of the things that I'm going to say right off the bat is I think it's just going to go up. I think it's going to be better. I can almost be confident that it's going to be better for one factor. The factor is he has taller receivers. The thing about those past years is he only had one tall receiver that was a hands-on receiver that was consistently like, the target at the X slot, which we all know is DeAndre Hopkins. We also had Green, who in 2021, he was his deep threat. He was his get up and get it guy, the one we keep saying that Kyler Murray keeps missing every single year. But 2022, everybody was like 5'10", 5'9", the type of people that you have to have separation to be able to throw it so that it could fall in the basket for them. The type of people that catch the ball like this and not like this. You need more people that can catch the ball like this, away from their body, pick it from the air. And this year alone, he probably has his best roster when it comes to like wide receivers and tight end that can do that. I've been recording film for the last three months. I can tell you Trey McBride is one of the best, get up and get it guys when it comes to at least for Kyler Murray's career, he's the best one, but he's one of the best ones in the league. He's the type of person who extends his arm fully out there, and he's not waiting for the ball to come to him. He's getting the ball up in the air. He's trying to snatch it away, and he has strong hands. Yes, he has had his, some of his moments, like in his rookie year, where he either drops passes, doesn't run the right route, misses a block. But I think all that's gone, and now Trey McBride is becoming possibly one of the best tight ends in the league. So he has that as one of his number one targets, 6'5". And then you have a 6'4" wide receiver that you just drafted that is supposed to be like a Larry Fitzgerald-esque body contortion, stab it out the air type of wide receiver with obviously the history with his family, the speed, the route running crisp ability. This guy reminds me a lot of Michael Thomas in 2017 when it comes to kind of his route tree, because one of the things about Marvin, you can move him everywhere. You can put him in the slot as well. But one of his best weapons was being able to push off of these corners who are trying to press him at the line of scrimmage. Use somewhat pass rushing moves sometimes. They're very he just kind of does the club technique where he just puts his arm over and then he runs to the middle of the field, and most of the time he's wide open on those. That was his favorite route, is that slant from the slot and whatnot. And of course, let's not forget Michael Thomas and even Greg Dortch, who I'm going to feature later on, so I'm not going to talk much about him. But Michael Thomas, he's the type of person who's a 6'2". We saw him get physical with corners. Yeah. We saw him go up and try to high point the ball and win most of the time. So this is the best roster for Kyler Murray. So yes, his yards per attempt is going to be up this year.
Yeah, and I think that goes without saying. It's definitely one of the better places. I think that the fact, Marcos, is that Cardinals fans are excited for a reason. This is a time where you've got a guy who's a star rookie coming in, a pretty good overall draft class, and a good emphasis, I think, at least on the team being able to have much more leadership, I think, moving here than we've seen in the past. Especially coming from Kyler Murray, there's been, and this is maybe just something that we can go over. I don't think that there was never there's well, let me phrase it this way. I had people who were calling me a Cliff Kingsbury like stan or like a fan at least for that, but I think a lot of that was more there was an overemphasis on Cliff Kingsbury and Kyler Murray hate that I thought that was out there, while at the same time recognizing there were limitations that we got to kind of see of where the Cardinals team were. There needed to be some changes and overhauls that they had to do, and they had to kind of take on a new identity, and they just did not do that in the 2022 season. Going into where we're at now with Monty, with Jonathan Gannon, what's really interesting, I think, Marcos, is a lot of these rankings we're seeing. Kyler's still like maybe 24th quarterback in the league. Gannon is still somewhere in the bottom third of coaches. Monty Ossenfort in some cases is still like in the bottom three of GMs, and a lot of it is because Marcos, Cardinals have to go out and win games and be able to have improvement. I think we can look and sit back and we can project and say, yeah, that seems like it's going to happen this year. But it does feel like in a what have you done for me lately league, that's kind of the biggest limiter, I think, at least on this Cardinals team and expectations, is going to be them going out and doing it. For right now, as far as when it comes to with odds that everyone's making, we're going to go with Mike Clay's list that he has because he's kind of a pretty good standard for just year in, year out, being able to just make projections like what's going to be the over under for win totals, what are their Super Bowl odds. And we can at least start here. You've got the Panthers as the lowest, tied with the Patriots, ahead of the Broncos. The Commanders, of course, with Cliff Kingsbury as their OC and Jane Daniels. You then have the Titans, the Giants, and the Cardinals then end up rounding as the seventh lowest, or I should say the seventh lowest in terms of all NFL teams. That would be a seventh overall pick. That would be like again in the top 10. He has them at over under of 6.5 games. He puts them at 5.6. Now he said they've gone under their win total in 2 years, but it's been a while for 3. They've had one winning season since winning 13 games in 2015, and that was that 2021 season for the most part. So he's kind of trending on the underside. I do think it's interesting with the Cardinals last year, Marcos. Cardinals, I believe, had a over-under of 4 wins last year. And if not for the Matt Prater missed field goals, we probably would be talking about some of that. Do you think that this 6.5 wins, is this something where you would be telling Cardinals fans to smash the over with their schedule? Or do you think that there's probably a better chance that the Cardinals are going to take a step forward, but maybe not the leap forward that many Cardinals fans would hope? Because I think that you and I can sit back here and look at a lot of the ways the context went, and it feels like Clay, he may end up being where we could be too high on the team because we're looking at the team as like, this is our team. Like we want them to do well, but I do feel like he's a little bit lower here than what I think the Cardinals can achieve.
I think with all like with every cylinder firing for the Cardinals, like with everything working well, like it should be like a well-oiled engine. I think you got to take the over on that. And I'm not just saying that because I'm a homer. I mean, people can say I'm more critical about the Cardinals and I'm more like realistic when it comes to their expectations. I will say if I feel like the Cardinals aren't projecting to go over 6 wins, I'll just say flat out, I'll say, no, I don't think this team is good enough. I think this team is good enough because you have pieces that are improved on both sides of the line. You have an improved defense when it comes to like personnel. There's places that were plugged in. You're flooding, and one of the things I got to give credit to Monty Austin for, he's flooding positions of need with picks, and he's not giving up on those picks. Like for example, cornerback has been a detrimental position for the Cardinals. We haven't been able to get a consistent, corner or like a top ranked corner or number 1 corner on the defensive side that's really, been at least able to step forward, that is not like a veteran or somebody like Antonio Hamilton, who did a great job for us. So on that side, that's one. Number 2, defensive tackle position. That's been kind of like a flustered type of position where we're not really getting people. We're getting guys in there to see what's going to work and whatnot. And of course, we have our edge position. That's like, that same thing. Like we didn't really address edge, but where he's trying to flood those positions with players to see if we can get a good rotation going, keep our people fresh, and see if that would work out. And on the offensive side, what the one criticism that I have about is like the interior line hasn't been addressed like it should be. But he's got this position on the outside when it comes to tackles. Drafting Paris Johnson last year, as much as I didn't agree with it, I mean that is a position of need, especially now that you let go of DJ Humphries. Paris Johnson now playing at the position that he needs to be playing in, his natural position at left tackle. And then, wide receiver, that's been, oh my God. I mean, I've talked enough about the wide receiver room. You guys already know how horrible that was. So he's doing a great job with that. So they are better, at least roster, wise.
No, absolutely. I think that's one of the things that we can talk about, at least as the Cardinals was. You kind of tore everything down last year. You found a couple of core pieces that you felt like, and then you not just built in this year with fleshing with bodies, like you said, on the defensive tackle spot, being able to get someone in here in a first round pick like Darius Robinson, who can be like a defensive lineman that you're hoping can have an impact in, the first season that he has in the NFL. But it's recognizing that like you kind of weren't going anywhere without your quarterback. No quarterback. You can probably win a few games with a backup if you've got a great team, but that is really what it comes down to in the league. I do think that that's something that we'll want to watch for, at least when it comes into this Cardinals team, to see how does Kyler look, and then also how does the supporting cast look, because I think we can all say this offense, what we saw late last year, and then some additions, notably Marv, is something that we're expecting to improve. Now, the defense is something that we've seen them add a lot more bodies, but it's not as proven necessarily for the most part. It's going to be something that we'll want to watch. I think Marcos is if this team is going to be able to be winning games next year, it's going to need some people to step up on the defensive side of the ball, and it's going to need Kyler and the offense to perform how we believe they can perform. Now, there's some extra help that Kyler can get for some of that, and that's going to be part of our film study today, for the most part, at least, is looking at some of what we have for the Cardinals and some of the other players. And Marcos, I think if you want to go ahead and take some of this away from some of the work that you've been doing while we've had downtime, there is quite a few cool things that you've been able to take away, I think, looking at the All-22 perspectives and things that just aren't going to show up in the box score when it comes to the Cardinals and some of their top players last year, including the guy who we're expecting to maybe not be a star, but at least an impact player this year in Greg Dortch.
Yeah, like absolutely. So I think I put it in as a video file. I'm not sure if it's coming up. If not, then I'll just share screen. Is it coming up on your end?
Let me wait for a second. No, let's go ahead and see if you want to go ahead and share it all away. So.
All right, let's go to my secondary window where I have all my film. So, why is it not doing it? Come on.
Okay. Yeah, this is what happens when you get with live shows, at least sometimes, for the most part.
Yeah, you're going to see the little intricacies of like, hey, this is what we got to deal with. But, all right, so I already got it up, so it's just got to wait for you. There you go. So, this is all obviously, this is from 2023. Last year, I got everybody separated over here. I highlighted these particular plays right here because it showcases the type of stuff that Greg Dortch isn't really recognized for that he could do as a 5'10", 5'9" wide receiver. That's like he didn't really blow it out in the combine. He's just a very, very solid and really good route runner. We saw that graph. What was it, like about a month ago when it talked about best separators in the league, and by himself, he was on the top right, and there's a reason why. This guy has fluid. He's got sharp cuts, but he also runs it kind of fluid, so it doesn't make any sense. You just got to see it. But let me put this one up first. This one's one of my favorite plays that he had of last season. It's his touchdown against Los Angeles. Of course, it was the blowout that we had, but so he's lined up at the outside. So you got your X down here, which is Hollywood Brown, and then you have your
Try sharing share the window over there. It looks like you've got your window pulled up on that side over here, sir.
Oh yeah. Can you see it now?
Try sharing the other window, at least that way our viewers can see that.
God, why is it not showing? Jesus. I'm over here talking to myself. Let me remove this real quick. Let's try this again. All right. I'm going to try it again as a video file. It should, I don't know why it's not coming up, but it should come up. There we go. There we go. Now we both can control it. Heck yeah. All right, we got this. So, as I was mentioning, right over here, you have Hollywood at the bottom of the screen. You have Greg Dortch lined up at the outside. So you have your ones on the outside, and it's a it's a 2-by-3 formation. So just watch Greg Dortch take on this corner by himself to the outside, and watch Kyler Murray deliver it to the outside shoulder. He knew where it was going with that ball.
That is
It's
a
just
back
beautiful.
shoulder fade, is what we would call those. Essentially, you're reading the coverage, your receiver's reading the coverage, and he throws him open. At least Dortch has great body control. It's also that's the read all the way that he's seeing there. You've got the one-on-one coverage. He knows Dortch is going to get open. Very fun little touchdown that's there, but especially since he's a smaller guy. You usually think of having large targets. Instead, you get to see that Dortch, he baits the guy upfield and is able to snag it back with one hand at the end.
One of the things that I really like about this, what he does is he puts his hand down in the end zone to be able to put not only 1-2 feet, but get a hand in there too. Mm-hmm. So he has great body control for like a smaller guy. But you're right, you don't see this in a 5'10" receiver. You usually, unless it's Tyreek Hill, but you don't see this in 5'10" receivers that can make these type of catches, have this type of body control. And of course, at the very end of it, he goes and taunts the cornerback, which. At the same time, I like how he taunted him, but we were down by like 20 points or something like that. But hey, Greg Dortch is he's pretty much deserving of that. So the next one I'm gonna share is gonna be a play from Pittsburgh. I think I've shared it on here before. I think people will remember this type of catch. If not, then here's the catch against the Pittsburgh Steelers. One of the things that I love about this catch is, as you can see, once again throwing it to the outside, and look at how he lays out for this. Mm-hmm. He just, we all know that like a hip, or like, what did it say? It's like a hip or a
one butt cheek equals 2 hands. I think is what someone said.
I didn't want to say it.
One cheek equals 2 feet. I think is what I heard a coach say a little while back, at least too, because it's like it doesn't matter if you drag the second foot. If you just boom lay down there and you're in bounds, you're good to go.
I was like trying not to go there with that, but hey, that's true. It is true. That's what they say. So obviously, with him landing within the boundary and laying on half of his one butt cheek and whatnot, he's able to make this catch come in. But once again, this is highlighted by the fact that Kyler Murray trusts him to the outside. I believe this was the game after Los Angeles. So after that game that we got just brutalized in. He knew that this was a target that he can target outside. And if people are paying attention who number 24 is, that's the number 1 cornerback of last year in Joey Porter Jr. So that's somebody that you want to be like hesitant to throw to, especially when he was a rookie, because he was having himself a really good year. So to not only line up Greg Dortch as, by the way, he's in this formation, I would say he's the X receiver. Yeah, he's the X receiver in this formation.
Your wide receivers up over at the top. You obviously can see your other slot down there in the middle. And then you can see where the safety right now, he's playing cover 1 high. And part of that, I think, too, is it's a passing down. You see how far Kyler has to go to get to the sticks. Cardinals clearly, at least, are in a spot where they've got a little ways to go on there. It's a really great play because I think it highlights, and this is something that I remember just from scouting or going through with in the past couple of years. Like, could Hollywood just be a slot guy, or can he play outside? And I said, I think Hollywood can play outside. We always wanted to see Rondale Moore get more time on the field for the most part. What we really have not seen as far as Rondale is the ability to beat man coverage, at least with his size and ability. We've seen him be able to get some openings versus zone. But Dortch has just got a different level, I think, not just of body control, but also understanding of just when you're in this type of a coverage that's there, he's able to do a quick stutter step, get open, get that separation. And then, of course, having the control to come back to the other side. It's one of those cases where this is tight man coverage from the Steelers. Like you can see with Trey McBride right there as they go and release. They've got the one guy on him that's in pretty good coverage, shading into his hip. And then Dortch is in tight coverage, but he's still able to get the ball and is open. It's one of those things when we talk about receivers in separation, you don't have to necessarily be wide open to still be open. If you are, as a receiver, able to have that control. One of the things where Rondale had not quite developed, I think, that we'd wanted him to do was to kind of be able to have some of these pieces like we saw with Dortch of taking that smaller frame, the guy who's, still plays tough and plays through things, and being able to get open against bigger guys. that was one of those things that he just hadn't quite lived up to with the Cardinals. Whereas Dortch being able to at least have some of these small, minuscule things, I think that seeing that step forward, the way that they've talked about him, Marcos, brings up an interesting question because it feels like the way that coming into the season we've always seen is Dortch is just wide receiver 4. Someone gets hurt, he'll come in. Cardinals signed Zay Jones in this offseason. They have Michael Wilson for the most part. That seems like he's that guy who's going to be the opposite guy who lines up against Marvin. Maybe you see Marvin move some into the slot in and out. Cardinals are going to run a lot of 12 personnel this year. The way they've talked about Dortch makes you wonder, are we going to see kind of Zay Jones, Dortch, and Michael Wilson kind of all share a role? Or is Dortch maybe going to be kind of that starting slot who can flex outside type of role for some of these passing plays? Because I think you and I would agree that based on what they're saying and what we've seen from last year, it feels like that should be the case, or maybe he ends up being closer to the wide receiver 2 than being a true wide receiver 4 this year.
Yeah, it's just every single year is just you just mentioned he's been seen as like, hey, you're the guy that's coming in to fill in for somebody else, and then he outproduces that player. And that player comes back from injury, and he's just put back on the bench or just taking the snaps away. The only time he gets significant snaps consistently as a punt returner, which is really good at as well. One other thing I wanted to highlight is because Joey Porter is also playing in a press man alignment, and he's going to get his hands and jam Greg Dortch. By the way, Joey Porter in this coverage did a really good job. That's good tight coverage from a corner that's up and coming. But it was better off. It was one of those situations where good defense, better offense, like in basketball. You have your hand up in your face.
Better throw beats better coverage. That's just how it is.
Exactly. He's not afraid to get physical with him. He puts his hands up on him, which was my criticism about 2 players. Great, Hollywood Brown and, of course, Rondale Moore. Those 2 players were either afraid to get physical. Once they were jammed at the line of scrimmage, they couldn't beat the coverage or they couldn't beat the corner with that physicality. Especially, I saw some snaps of Rondale Moore just avoiding, in certain plays, avoiding getting like either hit in traffic or just like jamming somebody, even if he wasn't part of the play per se, the guy that's going to get the ball. He would avoid contact at all times. And Rondo has a big frame. We've seen him lay defensive ends on their butts. Why is he avoiding these contacts? He can do it. He's strong enough to do it. So good luck with him in Atlanta, and as of course, good luck with Hollywood, with Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs. So yeah. All right.
It is very fun, at least. Do you have any other film clips for us today, Marcos, that we'd be able to go over?
I do. I got probably the one that people will remember. It's going to be between that one. I think I'll just upload the 49ers one because we all remember the Houston one. The Houston was one about like, how should I say, the big highlight, especially in that Ian Hartwitz tweet that I mentioned. But the 49ers one in Mexico City, this one's just showcasing how quick he is and how he can, he has the ability to be able to get like yards, even like through. Oh, look at that! I'm just gonna stop talking because it's so beautiful. Is it uploaded? I can't see it on my end. Oh, it's having trouble uploading, isn't it? Yeah, it's not showing on my.
See how it goes, sir. It's all good. Yeah, once you get it re-uploaded, I think we'll be able to show. But yeah, that was the one I think where, like you mentioned, it's a short pass for the most part, and you're getting that yak or the yards after catch. One of the things that we've seen with Cardinals fans is that yak is essentially a bonus that you get on to, as far as when you're a player, that just makes your quarterback be more helpful. So here, like you said here, this is essentially an extension of the run game. Like this is a type of play where it's an easy, like almost like 90%, 99% completed pass for the quarterback. You've got a blitz that's happening for the most part where you've got Nick Bosa, who's lined up as the essentially defensive tackle. And there you see Colt McCoy, at least in the Mexico City game, just quickly is able to get the ball out. And that's the best way you beat a blitz is you read the defense, you have an option, you get it to him quick, and you throw it right into the defense's vacancy.
Yeah, what's funny is like last year, the Cardinals started doing this segment where they were doing like film breakdown. I don't know if it was with Colt McCoy, I believe it was. And what he had talked about in this certain situation was that he got Nick Bosa to jump on the snap. So he knew he had a free play coming. Interesting thing that he did though was most of the time you try to hit the person downfield on a free play, but he got rid of the ball quick because he knew that like once he got him to hop, he was trying to get that ball out of his hands, get it to his best playmaker, and he does so. And Greg Dortch is kind of like, I mean, he makes a All Pro Fred Warner miss right there because Fred Warner's not going to keep up with Greg Dortch. I mean, he's an All Pro, but he's not going to keep up with the wide receiver there, especially someone like Greg Dortch. So, you know, these type of plays, they highlight what
so
he can do.
unique too. He's lined up essentially in the backfield like a running back, like you said, and they have a numbers match where he's got only one blocker downfield. They cut back inside for the most part. This is like one of those like Cliff Kingsbury bubble screen type of like, or swing pass staples. Like you said, the coverage is interesting as well because you look down at the bottom of the screen for where it is at that one. You've got one safety high. You've got the three linebackers are at least playing with the zone underneath. Looks like it's mostly all zone coverage underneath. When the ball gets snapped and it plays, you essentially end up with a kind of mismatch in favor of the Niners. Like you've got the running back who's running off to the right for the most part, and James Conner. He seems like he's kind of the decoy on that play. No one goes with him, and there's basically a 3-on-2 matchup against zone with Hopkins and I think the other player out there was 81. I think at least was the other receiver. What's funny and kind of interesting about all of this is that this is like an all Greg Dortch type of play where you're just trusting him to be able to make his end miss, and you've got a blocker in front of him, and then you can see there's AJ Green, I think, that's running downfield at least for some of that. It's a free play. Even if he gets tackled for loss, you're still going to be back over there. But I think, like you said, the ability to diagnose and see some of that blitz in some of that places. This is one of those plays that, like, you could say the Niners, it probably may not work for the most part, if not for Greg Dortch being able to break the tackle and go through. This is one of those things with Cliff Kingsbury's offense that was interesting because it does feel like the more we watched over time, Cliff just kind of needed guys to fill some of those roles in his offense. Like he needed a guy who could break tackles and be able to pick up yards after catch with some speed. They drafted Rondale Moore to be that guy. He wasn't. We got to see Greg Dortch come in that season and be able to actually be a contributor. I think it says a little bit about just kind of that bend with how much of it is the scheme, finding guys who fit your scheme, finding talent, and how much of it is adapting to the talent that you actually have and making some of those changes. And when you've got a guy who's as talented enough as Dortch, you can kind of find ways for him to be able to make plays. I think that's an interesting kind of gap between what we saw with Kingsbury and part of where the Cardinals fell, unfortunately, was because they really were not able to find some of those guys and be able to have some of that adapting. And some of, I think, finding those guys probably does fall onto the general manager, Steve Keim, in a way. You got a second round pick in Rondale Moore. And of course, we're talking about Greg Dortch, the undrafted guy, is the guy that we're expecting to kind of take that role this season for the Cardinals in a way that we've been waiting for Moore to do for years.
Yep. And 2 points before I move off of this video. He's been consistently healthy, so that's great. Number 2, one of the things about this type of formation is you always want to get that mismatch between the wide receiver and the linebacker. So they lined him up in the backfield as, shaded off to the left side of Colt McCoy to try to get that matchup, that mismatch. So that was that pre-snap read that he had where when he got him to jump, he knew that there was going to be a mismatch between him and Fred Warner. That's something that Drew Petzing needs to also take advantage of. You have all this receiver talent. Try to get some mismatches, especially with Greg Dortch. It's like what the Patriots did with Wes Welker, lining him up furthest to the inside, try to get him on the linebacker. Yep. Do the same thing with Greg.
Yep. No, I think that's, like you said, there are areas and skills that you'll have for some of those guys. And then there's other times where you're just not quite sure of how it's going to go. And that's where I think it'll be really interesting to see, because this year it feels like they have a plan. They know what's going to be kind of the case for it. And it really is something. I think that this is probably one of the few years where Cardinals fans, I think, can go in and have expectations and feel like that expectations should be met this season. It's not like that the Cardinals, like a good way to put it, the Cardinals are sleepers right now, Marcos, to probably everyone but Cardinals fans. Last year, we couldn't say they were sleepers. We knew they're a bad team that maybe will be able to punch up and hit the Cowboys every once in a while. But I think it's exciting. The one other thing I think we can go over before we do our training camp preview is just something that did pop up at least last June. We didn't get a chance to cover it, but essentially there was a interview that went on with Colin Cowherd and John Middlecoff that talked a little bit with just some about Steve Keim's guy. And then long story short, like, let me kind of put it this way to phrase it easier. Colin Cowherd would get a lot of times he would have Steve Keim on his show. It would be very obvious. Sometimes Steve Keim would kind of be a source for him. They go over and he's talking here with John Middlecoff, the former Niners, kind of, at least was a scout for the team, covers them as a Niners fan. He was the guy who infamously predicted that the Cardinals were going to get smashed to enter the 2021 season against the Niners. And I believe that was the game which Kyler ran all over Hopkins, caught, and they actually won that opening game, I think it was, in maybe it was 2020. But they talk about like part of Kyler needing to be able to grow up. They talk a little bit about some of the video games, and some of what they at least mention, at least, is this same narrative that we've heard for a long period of time. And now what's kind of funny is like one of the first things Colin Cowherd mentioned was, "Oh yeah, I'm friends with Steve Keim here." And so then as soon as that kind of comes up, a lot of Cardinals fans jumped on that immediately and having all sorts of like questions like, well, all right, you're talking about with Steve Keim here for the most part. And the question, at least for the most part, is like, I don't know, the conversation was weird, but I think the biggest takeaway that I think that I at least had of it, Marcos, is that there was a lot of former players who spoke into the media and said that Cards management would take credit for successes and would blame other people for failure and not take responsibility. So now here's like the thing that they talked about was, oh yeah, you're like, here's where it is with Michael Bidwell. You know, he's a hard owner to work for the most part. So you're like, okay, you're general manager of the Arizona Cardinals, and like, we don't want to keep coming back to some of this, but at some point you recognize and say, hey, this whole segment, which is coming out obviously with connections to Steve Keim, is talking about Michael Bidwell's a hard owner to work for. Kyler is playing too many video games, which if someone hasn't seen, like Mahomes and other people are there, there's a narrative obviously that seems like Kyler's trying to work on and correct, because we haven't heard anything about the games for the most part. And it really felt like it was a case where Colin Cowherd is just kind of throwing Kyler, throwing Michael Bidwell under the bus. And I think that's one of the biggest things that we complained about underneath with some of the Keim era and why it's taken a hard reset, is that when it comes to accountability, you need to not blame others, blame yourself, take responsibility. And for the most part, one of the things, at least with Steve Keim, that was on his end that we've seen is that, you know, part of the reason we can talk about now why he was let go from the team since he's admitted it was he had to get checked into rehab. Like, he had addiction issues. It was getting in the way of the team, and it was bad enough that he ended up having to leave the team midseason, and they just didn't bring him back for the most part, at least. Like, he was barely featured on Hard Knocks during this season because he just was not around as much for the most part. I think that one of the things that we can say, Marcos, at least here, and this is part of with Cardinals fans, we've wanted to be able to see the accountability and some of that take place. And it's really interesting that even years after the fact, it's kind of like an unfortunate nature where it feels like we've seen Cardinals and Michael Bidwell took some accountability, hired a general manager, and he's stayed out of a lot of the limelight from what we know. It's been mostly Monty Ossenfort speaking. We've seen Jonathan Gannon come in and be able to have the Cardinals be a more disciplined team. And we've seen Kyler Murray kind of step up this offseason where he's gone on to different radio shows. He's taken more interviews. He even has been talking openly about just how much growth he kind of had needed to go through. It does really just kind of feel like a lot of the accountability, at least that we saw for this Cardinals team where it struggled and why there was a lot of stumbling, it feels like that Steve Keim is still kind of in that similar pattern of it wasn't really his fault as a GM. It was just other people around him let him down. And some of that may be true, but I think for a lot of Cardinals fans, it does really feel like this is part of growing out and growing forward. And if we do see Kyler Murray be able to take steps and get back to kind of who he was in 2021 as a star player, it probably means that you're taking some of those steps for the most part. And that's something that I think is, maybe it's just me looking at it as like a life lesson, but it's one of those areas of like seeing how the Cardinals franchise and where you can finally find some lasting success is in taking those hard steps of accountability and not just blaming people around you for some of the other errors, mistakes, or some of the losses.
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me that, like, when it comes to SK and how he lays everything out. First of all, if you're gonna talk about accountability, Steve Keim, you do it when you're actually in the office, and don't do it after you got let go or when you had to step down, because at that point it comes off as like, oh yeah, like I tried to do the right things, but they wouldn't allow me, or this person let me down, or this happened, or this person that I drafted, really showed that he had a lot of potential, but he didn't fulfill the potential. And it's like you're the person that didn't know what you had when you drafted Kyler Murray. When you drafted Kyler Murray as the number one overall pick, and back in 2019, you knew what he was. You knew he was a big armed, athletic, smaller quarterback, and he wasn't going to be your prototypical, like, stand in the pocket, dissect the defense and attack the middle of the field type of quarterback. He didn't give him the tools to be able to succeed when it comes to that, with the exception of like, hey, I'm going to make a trade for DeAndre Hopkins, which was a big thing for Kyler, but he traded for him and got him AJ Green, and then he went ahead and flooded the position with the type of receivers that weren't going to help Kyler Murray out when it comes to like being able to strengthen what he does best, which we all know hitting the outside the numbers was his best ability, in the way that he's able to like make those big throws is to the outside. So instead of strengthening that, he went ahead and just flooded it with like a bunch of receivers that like are quick to be able to attack the inside, but he's not going to hit that position as consistent as he is going to be towards the outside. So Steve Keim shares a big load of the blame, and I can 100% say that like once he's out of the building, I have seen that Kyler Murray has been better when it comes to like you know taking responsibility, when it comes to like being a positive face in the building. Now, I'm not going to say it should take like somebody moving it off to be able to get to that point, but he's getting to that point at the very least. And I believe that part of that was because Steve Keim was just a bad connection with Kyler Murray. They probably weren't on the same page a lot. Monty Ossenfort at least is listening, like, to what Kyler Murray like either wants or what's going to make him better. So he listened to him on his first 2 years, literally coming in. So he said, "What do you need to be able to like for your success?" "Oh, I like this guy named Paris Johnson. Okay, we're gonna go and get him." And then now this year, I 100% believe that he was talked about. Okay, we have Marv. If Marv's at number 4, what do you think? Should we draft him? Is he going to be a big asset? Or Kyler would probably say, "Yeah, he's going to be a big asset to me. That's the type of receiver that I need to be able to succeed and be able to strengthen my strengths." So Monty also went ahead and did that as well. So it's in the position now where Kyler Murray really has the tools, or at least has most of the tools. So now we're going to see if it comes into fruition. If it comes into fruition, great. That means we're going to be a playoff team.
Yep, absolutely. No, that's something I think it's going to be just seeing the narrative of how the Cardinals go. This is like a very important season, and if the Cardinals are able to live up to being able to kind of build that firm foundation with the coach, the GM, and the quarterback, that's something I think Cardinals fans can look forward to, because it has been a really tumultuous time for being a Cardinals fan, just from my youth at least, going from the ups and downs at least of the Super Bowl season, and then the downs afterwards, to the rise back again with BA and Palmer, and then going down again. It's just been a roller coaster for the most part. Looking for sustainable success, I think, is what most fans are hoping for and expecting. We've got more coming up with training camp and some other stuff, as like we said, with bringing on some guests to talk about Cardinals offseason. But as we wrap up today, we're going to go with 3 players, Marcos. Now, we haven't gone over this. We don't know who the other has picked ahead of time. Who are 3 players that we're going to watch in training camp for the most part? We'll see how many of these are the same player potentially, how many of these guys are different. Marcos, do you want to kick it off at least with who's the first player that you're watching in training camp this year?
The first player, it shouldn't be a shock because of I'm a defensive oriented person, so I'm obviously going to be paying attention a lot to the defense this year. But Darius Robinson is the first person I'm watching because I'm interested in seeing the way they utilize him and how they're going to move him on that defensive line. So is he going to be playing more of like the defensive end position, or are they going to have him as a true like interior defensive tackle? It's interesting to see, but we'll see. I'm going to be paying attention to him exclusively, not only through the training camp, but also through preseason as well.
Right. I also had someone on the defensive line, at least. I had BJ Ojolari as my first player to watch, and Cardinals, like, it's between him and Zaven Collins. They added Robinson. I think that he's going to be kind of a defensive end / defensive tackle. He can slide inside versus being maybe that true edge rusher. which means it's a huge year for Ojolari. Zaven Collins, we've talked about last year. He really found his niche as like a edge run defender, but just he has not necessarily been able to be that guy who've taken the next step. And if he does take the next step this year, like maybe you could re-sign him as Cardinals player, but BG Ojolari is going to be that guy who determines, do the Cardinals go out and draft like another edge player or sign some guy to a huge contract next year? Or does Ojolari kind of become that top pass rushing threat? I think he's the number one player that I would watch because that has a huge impact. If you can get like 10 to 12 sacks out of him this year, you're at least going to be able to have kind of that core piece to your pass rush, something that the Cardinals last year we saw. None of those guys were able to finish on the defensive side with sacks in like the last 6 games of the season. The only sack they got was chasing Justin Fields backwards out of bounds. They just need to get a pass rush threat this year if the defense is going to take a step forward.
Yeah, that's interesting. That is called a sack too in the NFL. That's just so weird. My next player, and I'm gonna kind of like pay attention to mostly rookies. I don't want to cheat, but I also wanted to follow Keetrell Clark. But like, I'm interested in seeing how Elijah Jones turns out for this. He was somebody I was really high on, somebody I was excited that the Cardinals had picked up. 6'2", 180-pound cornerback for the most. He's probably going to be a defensive back in the outside. So that's my second player.
Right. I went the same way, but the other player, I had Max Melton at least was my number two player I wanted to watch. And some of this at least is like the Cardinals traded back. Could have had Cooper DeJean, could have had Kool-Aid McKinstry. They trade even Kamari Lassiter. They trade back all of those cornerbacks go before, and they said that we wanted Max Melton all along. He's a guy that's got size. He's able to match up. He was the guy that I felt like was more of a pure corner. Like then Cooper DeJean, I thought was a safety, and then Kool-Aid. It felt like when watching him that he probably was one of those guys who could be a good cornerback too, but there was just some areas and limitations that he just didn't make it into the first round for the most part. Melton is like that typical, has some of that talent, but isn't at that big school type of guy, and he's got better speed than Kamari Lassiter. You really were a team that said, hey, we're going to take this guy. Also, we're taking him over Jackson Powers Johnson, who's probably going to be either a stud center or an offensive guard for the Raiders with some health issues and some other questions that were there. You had a top linebacker and edger in Cooper. These are all like some guys who fell out of the first round or were at least top 30 types of players. Max Melton, if he lives up to the billing, is able to come in and kind of be one of those starting corners for the Arizona Cardinals, that's going to be a huge plus for them. And he's probably going to get a lot of time as a rookie. I do agree with you that Jones, another player taken the first 3 rounds, getting a cornerback for the Arizona Cardinals, I think, is huge because even though the team did not do well against the run last year, you can take a look at their roster and say they've just been depleted of corners. Starling Thomas was getting most of the snaps last year. You've got Buda Baker is in his essentially contract year. And outside of that, you really just need a future in the secondary. I think Melton's one of those guys that they took at least with their top 45, top 50 pick. He's going to have to play some well this year, and I'm going to be watching in camp to see if he's going to be that guy who's you can depend on as a starter.
Yeah, absolutely. I wasn't that obviously I wasn't so high on Max Melton, but I do want him to succeed because he's a Cardinal, and we need somebody to step up on the cornerback room. So Max Melton, yeah, I'm gonna say he's the toolsiest guy in this draft. That means like he has all the tools to be able to, be a up and coming or a good cornerback or maybe even a Pro Bowl cornerback if he's able to put those tools to the fullest. If he's able to maximize them, and of course, that's all on the coaching staff. Then my last person, and this one, I am paying attention mostly because of what's going to happen this year, which, it's going to be probably inevitable that Buda Baker's going to move on. And I don't like to think about it or face that fact because Buda Baker is the pounding heart of this team. He deserves way better treatment than what he's getting. But Dadrian Taylor Demerson is the next person. DTD, what do they call him? The Jackrabbit or the Rabbit?
Yep, Rabbit. Yes, indeed.
Yeah, and obviously I have a bunny myself too. His name's Marv. So that's another reason why I'm, the kind of like paying attention to him is because he's a rabbit. So DTD is projected to be like the next like lineage of Cardinal safeties that are like 5'10", like safeties, but they're great tacklers. They're good in coverage. You could put them on a tight end and you could feel confident about them being able to hold up in coverage, storm the alley, come from the third level to come down and make the tackles, bust like screenplays and whatnot. Those type of hard nosed type of safety. So and we had Brett Coleman even make that comparison to Tyrann Mathieu in his opinion.
Yeah.
So I'm paying
Right.
attention to him.
No, I think that's great. I was looking also at multiple years. Like I wasn't looking at for this last spot a Mac Wilson who's on a 1 year deal. I wasn't looking at a Zaven Collins who's essentially on a 1 year deal. I wanted to know about Cardinals players who can hit now, and you've got them on a cost controlled contract for the next few years. And I wanted to do an offensive player, so I looked at like maybe you look at John Gaines. Does he come back off of injury? The team drafted Isaiah Adams and Chip Ryman, all of these guys who were, potentially could be cornerstone pieces for the next 4 to 5 years. But at the end of the day, I'm like, it's Marv. You took this guy expecting him to basically fill in that role of being your next Anquan, your next Larry Fitzgerald. I want to see some of those flashes in training camp, and I think that we will. But that's one of the things of just being able to actually have some of those like great catches, being able to see some of the separation. You want to see him be able to come out of the gate and be worthy of kind of that anointing that many people have had for him. So he's my third player. A little bit of a boring pick there, obviously, but it's anything but boring, at least here.
He's not boring
about this. Yeah, it's anything but boring when talking this Cardinals team here with you, Marcos. Let's go ahead and wrap up our show there for the most part. This has been the Redbird Reboot. We'll be back probably within the next 2 weeks or so with another show, and we'll also be talking about at least a little bit more of what we're looking at with training camp, as well as some news. And we should have at least another guest or two along that time, and then it's full into training camp coverage at the end of the month for this Cardinals as they are about to enter their 2024-2025 season with a lot more expectations than we had for them last year. So for Marcos, I'm Blake. If you want to shout out Marcos, where our viewers and podcast listeners can find you and your content as we wrap up today.
Well, obviously here at the Redbird Reboot, we have a YouTube channel. You can also find our videos there, leave a comment. You're gonna also find me on Twitter at Pancake Soul. Of course, you got the right there. You got the sign right there. I just want to make sure because I'm always like opposite side. But yes, anyways, right there you can find me on Twitter. Follow me or just send me a tweet. I always respond to like anybody that has any questions about anything like that. So yeah, that's where you can find me.
Yeah, we'll have some more news at least upcoming about with our show as well for all of that. But thank you guys at least for tuning in. This has been the Redbird Reboot podcast, which means that now that it's done, it's time for us to log off for this week. Thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful rest of your 4th of July weekend.
Take care, guys.